Hi, I'm Brian Yates, and this is a talk, the first of 4, about program evaluation. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology here at AU, and I think of myself more and more as a program evaluator first and a psychologist second. Hope that's not offensive. My objectives in this series of talks overall is to help you first name a professional organization for program evaluators, to also describe and be able to give examples of several differences between program evaluation and therapy. Also, to describe how evidence is now used to guide practice in psychology and other disciplines. Also, to explain the differences between effectiveness, costs, and benefits. Oh yeah, I got more objectives. To distinguish between findings of cost effectiveness, so that when you read something you can say that's a cost effectiveness finding or a cost benefit finding, and to describe interesting examples of both, relevant to psychology. Also, I want to go beyond just measuring costs, effectiveness, and benefits and show you how program evaluation, particularly what I call cost-inclusive program evaluation, can help you identify causes of resistance to evaluation. You should be able to identify 2 causes of resistance and offer 2 arguments to counter that resistance. All right, that's a tall order, but we got 4 talks. I'm guessing they're going to be about a half hour to 45 minutes, but we'll just have to see. First, let me begin with the classic, what is evaluation? Now here's some words and some definitions, but these aren't ironclad. Evaluation applies, and this is from the American Evaluation Association, applies systematic inquiry to help improve services, programs, and products, as well as the human actions associated with those. So it's very human services focused. You can do program evaluation on anything. You can evaluate a air pollution reduction program that does not rely a lot on human behavior. And that sort of thing is done. The Environmental Protection Agency does a lot of program evaluation. The Government Accounting Office, GAO, has a lot of program evaluators in it. But the focus is very often on human services, and that's certainly my focus. Most evaluators' work varies a lot. They work with organizations, policy, performance, research. They even evaluate evaluation itself, as do most people getting evaluated. You learn a lot about a lot of things. You become a Jack or Jill of many trades. There's a common ground, though, for evaluations. They all want to achieve some accountability. They want to learn. And they want to basically help others, stakeholders in particular, decision makers, funders, consumers, and advocates of clients, all get the information that will help them make the judgments they need to make. That might be viewed as summative evaluation, make judgments, but there's also a very formative, improvement-oriented focus as well. Of course, like most things, sometimes these goals aren't always achieved. We'll get into that, but first, who are these guys and gals, and where are they? Evaluation covers a lot of disciplines. You can find evaluators in public administration. You find them in education, applied social research, policy, public health, certainly psychology, certainly educational research. That's probably the biggest original source. Economics, poli-sci, sociology, performance auditing, statistics, even operations research. You find them in schools of business, and more often you find them in nonprofit firms, often privately held and operated. Some are small mom-and-pop operations, some are huge research corporations. Evaluation gets done because stakeholders need reliable and valid information to carry out their duties, their responsibilities. Evaluators help prevent information gaps by improving knowledge, understanding, trying to help the stakeholders all understand how the programs work. And as part of the process, the evaluators end up understanding a lot more about programs. It's a free ticket to travel and explore a lot of different fields. To strengthen public accountability, those of you who are public policy minded, evaluation is something that can really help in terms of, is that a good expense of our tax dollars, and is there a better expenditure? To assess effectiveness and to assess the efficiency of a program is a big part of program evaluation, and identifying other opportunities and pathways to getting the objectives done, to achieving the outcomes we need to achieve within the fiscal constraints imposed by budgets and by fiscal and other realities. That's all part of program evaluation. One way of looking at evaluation is it's like photography. This is something that was developed by a guy named Nick Furnam, assistant professor at the time, University of Georgia, in the Georgia Cooperative Extension. He viewed the purposes of evaluation as being like photography, collecting information or photos. You may need more than one camera to do it well, more than one angle. You may need to look at it from the angle of the provider, for example, and the client in mental health services. You might need to use a variety of lenses too, one that can really focus on the detail, the quantitative, and one that can scope out and focus on the qualitative. And if you're thinking, wow, I thought a program evaluation would be all real numbers, it's not. Qualitative analyses, qualitative information are really key to understanding evaluation. As soon as you begin a program evaluation, you start appreciating more and more the impossibility of quantifying everything and the advantage of looking at qualitative differences. In Furnam's evaluation course, he uses cameras to describe what he's trying to teach. He says how to work them and what to photograph. That's what he tries to teach. He has a foundations of evaluation that teaches just that. Preparing for a camera sightseeing trip, he calls that part 2 of his course, planning and evaluation. So if you were taking the pictures, what would that be like? Collecting the evaluation data. Developing the pictures, that's analyzing and interpreting evaluation data. You could think about this for research as well, of any sort. And evaluation really isn't research. There is a connection, and there's a field called evaluation research, but this is a little different, this program evaluation thing. Finally, creating and distributing the photo album, hopefully not to lie gathering dust on a shelf, but being used. That's sharing evaluation findings. A big challenge, by the way. Evaluation is a profession. It has a variety of associations. This is one of the biggest, the American Evaluation Association. It has a website, eval.org. You can consult. These links should be active, by the way, and you can click on them and get to a variety of indices. There's a special rate of membership for grad students, and there's an annual convention. There are e-workshops, and there are coffee breaks free to members. There's a lot of resources there. I am a member, full disclosure, and I've been on the board and been the treasurer for a number of years. I'm no longer on the board or treasurer, though, but I continue to be a member. So what do evaluators look like? Before we get into the specifics of it, give you some examples from psychology and mental health, I want to give you some demographics. You could view this as the participant section in the research write-up if you're comfortable with that. Well, the problem with numbers like this in a little table is that they're hard to read. Membership has grown, though, if you can see that, from a little over 3,000 in 2002 to almost 6,000 in 2010, and these data stopped being collected this systematically because we got a different, bigger association management company. But 2014, as I'm speaking, I believe we've hit 8,000 and we're growing. There was just a little pause in 2009 when the growth was only from about 5,450 to 5,500, but it did not decline. It survived the Great Recession just fine. So who are these people? Well, let's look at gender, one of the most common demographics. Here we see the rise in membership from 2002 to 2010, it's a little hard to see, even in this stacked bar graph, how the trends are. You can certainly see there's more pink than blue in every year, and women do dominate this association in lots of wonderful ways. There's a small green group that could include transgender and people who just prefer not to identify. Looking at a different kind of cumulative bar graph where it's 100%, you can see over time that the proportion of women has continued to grow, albeit slowly. Ethnicity. Tables full of numbers make your eyes glaze over. Let's look at the graphs again. Here you can see that there has been an increase in membership. The blues, which you probably can't see, are European Americans, and they continue to be the largest group, but there has been some growth in other groups. Let's go to the percentile graphs, and you can see that European Americans have diminished as a majority over time, mirroring the population shifts. But what we have here, and this is an odd thing, it has to do with the problem perhaps in measurement, is international is the next biggest group. And it's odd that international would be discussed that way. The African Americans are this group. International is big. The American Evaluation Association is more than 10% composed of people who identify themselves as international. Now this area has a variety of professional journals with peer review as well as topics, invited topics. There are links here at the American Evaluation Association, for example. There's the American Journal of Evaluation, AJE, and New Directions for Evaluation that put out a series of topics. And not sponsored by AEA, Evaluation Review and Evaluation and the Health Professions. There's plenty more. I serve on the board, the editorial board of Evaluation and Program Planning, which is neither AEA sponsored nor listed here, but it's an interesting journal as well. You can go to the Wiley site. This gives you some idea of what it looks like. New Directions. There's the ISSN if you're interested, and the American Journal of Evaluation. That's what the cover looks like. I don't see these in print anymore because I get a discount from AEA for getting them just electronically. Evaluation Review is, as it looks, kind of a more traditional staid publication, and then Evaluation in the Health Professions has been around for a long time. And certainly this interface between evaluation and public health is very big. In the Department of Psychology here at American University, we have a program evaluation research lab. Guess who's in charge of it? You can sort of tell from this web address. It's me. Call it Pearl. And let me just share with you briefly in a few more slides lessons that I've learned from program evaluation about psychological and more generally human services. I'm still learning. This is what I've learned so far. Some providers can measure costs and analyze cost and cost benefit just fine. And they can learn to do this themselves. They don't need to hire a program evaluator. And I view my primary job is trying to get myself out of a job teaching others just about anything, including cost-inclusive program evaluation. More definition on that term in just a bit. I've also learned that very often you sometimes get what you pay for. But more often, outcomes don't differ appreciably. Most outcomes of most therapies, for example, are positive. The effect sizes are robust. They are medium to large. The effect sizes of most therapies have been extensively evaluated, and as you probably know, the effect size of the positive effect size of therapy is about as big in absolute magnitude as the negative effect size of smoking on lung cancer. So that's big and a problem for therapists who smoke, but we'll talk about that more later. More often, I mentioned the outcomes don't differ, but costs do, and costs do differ for different types of therapy, of course. They differ for different types of programs. And once in a while, more expensive is less effective. Less expensive is actually more effective. You don't always get what you pay for. I've also learned that including costs in evaluation can be easy or difficult. It depends on how you define costs, but more often the setting. and the politics of the setting. And if the setting is very worried about its evaluation, I've seen settings, for example, very concerned about becoming evidence-based practices. They were very worried about costs and didn't want to include them, primarily because in their pursuit of evidence-based practices, they spent as much as they possibly could to achieve their goals. And unfortunately, in this era, given that we all have constraints and budgets to meet, one can't spend all the time and energy and effort one would want. Of the limited amount of funding we have, of course, we want to spend it helping as many people as possible. At least that's my focus. We all got different ideas, I guess. Well, let me also run over some definitions that I'll use for the rest of these talks. These are commonly accepted definitions in program evaluation, and quick ones. What's a program? I would call it an effort to help people get along better than they've otherwise would get along. Every program that I've seen has costs and outcomes. Costs I define, and I'll go into this in more detail, as resources that are consumed. They could be volunteered time, they could be donated space, but there's still resources consumed. And they may have a monetary value, which would be another way of looking at cost. And all programs have outcomes, even if there's no change at all. Even if the program hurts, it's an outcome. Examples of programs? Well, you've certainly heard of Head Start, and there's been a lot of literature, a lot of research on whether Head Start works well or not. Just about any clinic in my mind is a program. Even people who decide to start gaining or losing or maintaining weight or buffing up on their own. That's a program, a self-management program. Community mental health centers are one of the early programs that a much earlier administration set out. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, definitely a program. Consumer operated. Smoking cessation interventions of almost any sort are programs. And drug abuse prevention campaigns, media or otherwise, they're programs as well. Is a university a program? I'd say it's composed of many programs, educational in their intent by and large. So what's assessment? We use the word assessment all the time in psychology to talk about assessing, diagnosing individuals. We might assess aspects of their personality that are key to understanding how they tick or how to help them tick better. Assessment means something similar in program evaluation, trying to measure qualitatively, quantitatively in particular, something that's of importance. Assessment is a big part of evaluation, but it's not the same as it. It's part of evaluation. Just as people can be assessed for their health, mental or physical, their intoxication, their skills, so can programs be assessed, primarily for how well they accomplish their goals. Most of us have personal goals. Programs typically have to have goals to get funded, and they have to state them rather clearly. In education, we talk about learning objectives of courses, for example. I gave you some objectives earlier in this talk. For all these talks combined, programs also have their goals, and they can be looked at quantitatively as in pure counts, as how many clients at least achieved the minimum threshold for the desired outcomes. They could also be the average score on an objective or not so objective test. For most programs, assessment asks whether the program actually does better than no program at all and the treatment as usual, or TAU, other programs that are already in place, the accepted treatment. Well-intentioned, well-designed programs may not be the cause of apparent effectiveness, though, because another program can be helping. People can be beginning better on their own. As we know, it's real important to have comparison groups, and this is where experimental design and a whole different field called quasi-experimental design enters into the fray. Program evaluation does use research designs. Random assignment is not always possible and actually can harm things sometimes. So if program evaluation can't use randomized clinical trials, it has developed a whole host of other methods of trying to eliminate alternative explanations for the apparent success of a program and trying to understand the occasional regrettable failure of a program. That's something that's not necessarily attributable to the program itself. Some of us have focused, I focused in particular on trying to design an evaluation that'll let us get into the program to see what it is that did and didn't contribute to the positive or the negative outcomes, so we can isolate the critical ingredients of success or the flawed ingredients of failure of the program at the individual, community, and program level. More on that later, and some examples coming in coming talks. Let's talk a bit about effectiveness. The word's used a lot. Effectiveness in program evaluation are, simply put, outcomes that aren't money. Examples: reduced bullying and assaults, reduced emergency room or ER visits, increased employment, but not increased earnings, but increased hours worked, increased number of people employed. You could even talk about increased level of employment. You could say, are they working up to their level of skill or beyond it? Benefits, simply put, are outcomes that are money. There's two types. One could be outcomes that come in monetary units. For example, improved income or savings in healthcare expenditures. Other benefits are outcomes that can be converted into money or monetized. Yep, it's a term. Reduced emergency room visits could be monetized if you knew the cost of each type of emergency room visit. Savings in income support payments, and these savings are a big deal in most social service programs. The savings in income support would hopefully be not to just cutting people off the rolls or increasing the criteria, making them more severe for income support, but actually the person actually being employed. Similarly, reduced healthcare expenditures would hopefully, and this would be an important question to ask in the program evaluation, was any savings in healthcare expenditures due to closing emergency room doors, or was it due to the person functioning so well they no longer needed the visits? Savings in criminal justice costs is a big area for substance abuse treatment and for some forms of mental health treatment, hopefully due to less crime, fewer arrests, rather than less enforcement. Okay, we've talked about effectiveness, we talked about benefits. Let's talk about costs. Costs are not benefits. Costs are the value of whatever it takes to make the program happen, the resources used by the program. And I view costs not as what it should take, but from a researcher's perspective, what did it take? The time, the energy, the effort of skilled providers. That's the biggest expenditure, the most important resource as well in most human services, certainly in psychological services. Most people need office space, though, for meetings with clients, with consumers, for supervision. Imagine what it would be like if you had to conduct your therapy outdoors or without any particular space. Of course, this is done in some ways with phones, with telepresence, but that requires additional resources, communication services, for example. These aren't the only resources needed. As some of you know, and as many of you will discover, once you begin an externship, certainly an internship, liability insurance may be necessary. And there's often administrative costs, including accounting and human resources. All of these, and usually more, are needed to make any kind of program happen. I don't try to measure every resource, certainly not the paper clips, unless they're absolutely necessary. But some things may be needed. For example, you can look at the amount of coffee needed for a consumer-operated drop-in service, and you could dismiss that. I remember being asked one time, do we really need to measure the coffee cost? And I said, okay, would your drop-in program still attract the clients if you didn't have free coffee? And they said, well, measure the coffee. Okay, to get back to the slides. The money needed to assemble providers' space, that's what people often call the cost of the program. I found one of my other lessons is that this may misrepresent what actually is required for the program. If you want to replicate the program, especially in the human services, volunteer time, the donated time of interns and externs, very valuable for most human services and rarely appears in accounting records. A lot of staff in the human services, especially mental health, are underpaid if they're paid at all. Space may be rented at below market rates or even donated. And of course, there's donated food. Many people donate transportation and equipment. And think of the resources the client brings. Rarely is the consumer of a service asked, so how much time did you spend in this session? Most people assume it's the same amount of time as the provider, but very few people ask, and how much time did it take you to actually get to this office? And how much time is it going to take you to get back home or to your work or to your next errand? And the actual cost of the transportation, that too is rarely assessed. If you want to understand compliance, adherence to treatment, and why some people drop out and others don't, these are crucial resources to measure from the client's perspective. Clients, after all, are a big stakeholder. Other costs, and some examples of them, cost per client. It's good to know the average cost per client. Of course, it may vary, and it varies from different perspectives. The clients may focus on their time and their transportation expenses and whatever they have to pay out of pocket. The cost per client from a community perspective, from a funder perspective, may be very different. It may not include client time or transportation because the funder doesn't pay for that, but the funder may have to pay for the space, for the providers, for liability insurance and administrators, and so on. Sometimes it's useful to talk about the cost per slot or per bed. That's useful for any number of funding decisions. That's not a cost effectiveness or a cost benefit measure, though. That's cost. Cost per day the client's in the program, very useful to know. Work out your budget. Cost per group conducted, also useful to know. These are all straight cost, values of the resources devoted to the program. Cost effectiveness is different. Here's one way to look at cost effectiveness. What does this program accomplish relative to its cost? And accomplish is measured in non-monetary units. So examples: cost per drug-free day produced by different treatments. Cost per child prevented from smoking, a longer-term assessment. Cost per year of life saved. These are all outcomes. Cost per quality-adjusted life year, a very common measure when looking at health. We'll talk more about quality-adjusted life years and explore an example developed by a former grad student in this program when the student was actually in our program, in our department, in the clinical Ph.D. program. Yeah, okay, he worked with me, Mike Freed. We'll talk more about him later. We talked about cost and cost effectiveness. Let's move on to cost benefit. Cost benefit asks questions like, is the cost of this program, perhaps including volunteered resources, perhaps not, but from the perspectives we're taking, is the cost of this program justified in terms of the value of its outcomes? Outcomes in cost-benefit analysis are always measured in the same units as cost, typically monetary units like pounds, yen, euros, or dollars. Examples: the ratio of dollars spent for therapy versus or against the dollars saved and reduced unnecessary use of health services. Or the net benefit after subtracting costs of a diversion program for homeless adults. And the net benefit is you take the total savings, maybe any income increments, and subtract from that what it took to actually operate the program. That would be net benefit. Well, look, those are quick definitions, and this has been a quick talk. This is the first of 4 on program evaluation viewed from the perspective of a psychologist. Yeah, I'm a psychologist some of the time and a program evaluator the rest of the time. This is the end of that first part of the talk. There's my email address, brian.yates@mac.com, if you want to contact me. And till we meet again, till you listen again, bye for now.